I was being paid a lot of money and just not working that hard. But frankly, I wish I could tell you that I had the bravery to just...
Erin Wade, founder of Homeroom and author of Mac and Cheese Millionaire. She made the leap from a career in law to building a successful mac and cheese restaurant out of her passion about food and her love for cheese, choosing to leave behind the comforts of a corporate job.
The way school is structured, I mean, literally everything is really setting you up to be successful in a very narrow definition of success. Even though I hated this job, like I cried the day I was fired.
Erin found herself in a golden handcuff situation, just being paid a lot of money and not working that hard, but something was missing. Erin reflects on her realization that she wasn't living her life's true purpose. She knew she had to make a change.
To take a chance for something I might really love when I can always fall back on something I don't love. No matter how bad things get here, it's never as bad as that.
When you've spent your entire existence walking as narrowly as possible on the path that teachers, parents, and school have forged for you, it's hard to make your own way.
Yeah, I think there's no magic secret to like believing in yourself and having that confidence, you know. It felt like forever at the time because I'm really impatient, and when I was not working and not making money, so it felt stressful to me as I'm like watching my bank account just dip every month. It was like 15 months from the moment that I was fired to the moment that Homeroom opened. The restaurant was very busy from the moment it opened.
As the founder of Homeroom, Erin changed the way we think about comfort food, turning a humble dish into a thriving business with a lasting impact on the F&B industry.
If you're doing something you love, if you engage other people in doing stuff they love, if you really like do the right things, you can create things that genuinely change the world. Our staff was complaining that they were experiencing harassment by customers.
Beyond just the restaurant, she created a groundbreaking harassment prevention system, the Color Code of Conduct, which is now used by bars and restaurants around the world.
I mean, I think that it's just always worth taking that chance.
I would rather try and fail, but not fail to try.
The further I made it in the world of business, the more I was like, where on earth are all the women?
Stay tuned as Erin takes us on a journey from corporate law to building a beloved brand, overcoming setbacks, and creating something that truly matters and setting role models for new entrepreneurs.
First of all, I really wanted to thank you for accepting my invitation to join the podcast. I'm really super exciting for this because after I read your book has all my favorite elements. It's a book about entrepreneurship. It's a book about someone who has made it transition from 9-to-5 world. And it's also very importantly, a book about food and all the memories and stories. So really thank you, Erin. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I was really grateful that you reached out, and thanks so much for just being so like positive and spreading the word. I wrote it to have an impact. So I think when it does, I just I'm like, great.
Yeah. So maybe just for the listeners who haven't come across your work yet, because the podcast, the name is called Escape 9-to-5. It's a very selfish podcast because I spent 10 years in investment banks, way too long.
Yeah.
I really need these kind of stories and time with people who have transitioned from a very traditional kind of successful, like people in the norm, people think that you should just, doctor, banker, lawyer.
Totally.
So you, as a lawyer, I usually started a podcast as a Two Truths and a Lie. So your Escape 9-to-5 version, so that you can tell me 3 statements and I'll guess which one is the lie.
Okay. All right. The 2 truths and a lie. Let's see. I used to work for Michelle Obama. I used to work for Kamala Harris. And I used to work for Kirstie Alley.
One of them is a lie.
Correct. Yeah.
I think the last one.
No, that one's actually true. I never worked for Michelle Obama.
I worked for Michelle Obama. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess these are all tied to your legal background, right? Because you're used to all the other 2, Kamala Harris and Chris. For listeners who are
Kirstie Alley's an actress. I actually worked tutoring her kids and as a private chef for her. So one is from cooking, one is from law. But I mean, it's pretty funny that I worked for these 2 figures that are famous. I wish I worked for Michelle Obama. That would have been nice. But
yeah, because I tied to your law background, so I was like, maybe the first 2 are true. Because I also know that you have your other work that we're gonna dive into about in 2017 the Me Too movement and those kind of stuff. That's why I was like, maybe there's some kind of link. Um, so
Totally.
that's a quick introduction. We didn't really get to know because I was very ready because I know almost all the stories that you wrote in the book already. So for the
Yeah.
listeners who doesn't know you, you used to be a corporate lawyer and then you basically ditched that. You're like, screw this, I'm gonna do my mac and cheese restaurant. So I love the books that tells real stories. And what stood really out to me is that your vulnerability and the raw stories. Maybe you can bring us back to the point that you decided, like, this is it. I'm gonna go for my own thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think like some people who end up in a traditional 9 to 5, it really is for them. And for me, it wasn't. I was really taught, I was brought up in a Jewish household that had fairly traditional values in terms of like, do something practical that can support you, don't take risks. So I didn't, but I had always loved restaurants and cooking. I'd worked for them before I ever became a lawyer, but, honestly, for me, the thing that allowed me to pivot was actually, I think, for one, being so deeply unhappy as a lawyer. Like, I think when, the expectation didn't meet reality, like, I thought maybe it wouldn't be so bad or be okay, but I think just the difference in what I thought that world might look like versus what it actually felt like and how unhappy I was. But also, frankly, I wish I could tell you that I had the bravery to just leave on my own and like walk out of the office, but I didn't. I was actually fired. And for me, getting fired was actually a real wake up call because I was always an overachiever and I'd never been fired from anything before. So I was like, gosh, I just got fired, not even because I had done anything specifically wrong, just I was being paid a lot of money and just not working that hard, and they were like, we could hire a lot of people who will work harder than you and who will care more, And I think that was upsetting to me. I was like, gosh, I'm failing at this because I just actually don't care about being better than I am. And that just seemed like a really sad way to live life. So I sort of asked myself what would have more meaning and purpose. And I'd always wanted to open a restaurant and I just decided to take a chance.
Yeah, that's the moment that really hooked me, when you opened the book, because I was actually let go twice in
Oh,
banking.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
I got let go in 2020. It's all because the team wasn't performing that well. And then the first time I got a better job, so I moved to London. And then last end of 2023, I was let go again. So that time I was very prepared. This time I just made an intentional choice not to go back and seek for the same kind of job. I'm very grateful for all the experience and like network that I've built in the traditional banking sector. Still like very early on in my journey. So
Yeah.
when I read the book, I was like, I also do not have the courage to, and also do not have the choice to just like quit because I'm always on a visa. I was on a work visa, and then the biggest thing for me is like, how could I even stay and continue my life in London even? And eventually I
Right.
got like talent visa that allows me to build my own thing. And I was like,
Mm,
let me just go for it. But then
totally.
I think for a lot of people, if we can just go back to that moment a little bit more, is some people, they will view it as like a tremendous setback to their own identity and even like a rejection.
Mhm.
You just made the decision. I remember you talked to your friend, you said, I feel like I've always wanted to do my own thing. I just don't want to go back to being a lawyer. So how do you jump out of that? Like you just make that decision, like I'm done. I don't want to.
I mean, I think in fairness, I did take it as a tremendous setback and rejection. I mean, even though I hated this job, like I cried the day I was fired, I found it really upsetting. It was hard to feel like a failure, even though I was failing at something I didn't care about, succeeding at. Yeah, I think it is hard. But I think once I like took a step back, I did see it as a bit of a gift because it was definitely a golden handcuff situation. I was making a lot of money and a lot more relative to the amount of effort in particular that I was putting in. I think I could have languished like that for a very long time. And I think that would have been a shame. I just would have been wasting my life. So, I think in my case, the story, it always sounds like a little bit, I mean, I read about it in the book, but it always sounds sudden, like, oh my God, you left a lawyer to open a restaurant. But I had been thinking, and my brain had been churning on restaurants for years and years and years. I'd worked in them. I had really wanted to start one. I just couldn't sort of have the money to do it. So it was like a dream I had long held. And then it was just the first time in my life I was like, oh, I could just make this a reality right now, And so it seemed like worthy, because I think there is something freeing about going down the path that other people tell you, you should want, or is what traditional success looks like, and not in liking it, because, honestly, even as I did the restaurant, no matter how hard it got, I never had this sense of like, oh my God, how wonderful would it be to just have someone pay me a check and sit at a desk. I always knew, like, no, that's terrible. Like, no matter how bad things get here, it's never as bad as that. And I think there is a gift to that, to knowing what the alternative looks like and being like, you know what, it's pretty soul sucking and not for me,
Yeah, exactly. I think I resonate with that. Before you even said that, no matter how hard it can get, it wouldn't be as hard as as bad as it used to be. Nowadays, I even remind myself, I was talking to a friend the other day. I was like, no matter how stressful the current situation it is for myself, it's not as stressful as it used to be when I was in banking.
Totally.
And my friend was like, maybe because that stress is not controlled by you in the past. Like, I don't have this autonomy. I really feel like these several years, this past year, especially for these kind of conversations, it just gave me the permission sort of just to chase down to my own path. I also very resonate with this quote that you have on the book. You said, when you've spent your entire existence walking as narrowly as possible on the path that teachers, parents, and school have forged for you, it's hard to make your own way. What advice would you give to someone standing at the crossroads today, if they maybe just come across like they may be laid off, they may be thinking of how should they make their life more meaningful to them, or thinking of doing something new?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And yeah, I mean, my point in the book is really that I think it's very hard, because all of our training, all of the social messaging, the way school is structured, I mean, literally everything is really setting you up to, be successful in a very narrow definition of success, to work for other people, to, do what someone else tells you to do to be successful. And honestly, if that works for you, great. I think there's plenty of people for whom that does. They're probably not the people listening to this podcast. But I think for those where it doesn't, and you're just like, oh gosh, what do I do? I think some relevant advice I'd have, I think, one thing is just sort of ask yourself. I mean, I realized that, in everyone's financial position, risk profile, all this is going to be different. But for me, I was like, gosh, my worst case, if I tried to do the restaurant, I didn't succeed, is I'd lose a lot of money. But honestly, I could always go back to making more money. I could always go back to working and being miserable, right? Like if I had to, if things got really dire, I wasn't going to be on the streets. I would just have to work a job I didn't like, maybe. And I realized that I was living my default worst case scenario already. I was like, this is crazy. Why did I just decide to do this versus to take a chance for something I might really love, when I can always fall back on something I don't love if it's not successful? So I think, ask yourself, are you living your worst case scenario already? Because then, like, what do you really have to lose in all of this? I think that was really motivating for me.
Yeah. That's this practice. I think Tim Ferriss, he coined this as fear setting. So what's the worst scenario that could happen? When I talk to some of my friends, especially were raised in a certain way, all like straight A students, my friends more straight A than I am, then they usually will be like, what if something that doesn't go as planned? Like, and now after so many things that doesn't go as planned for me, I'm more comfortable when things doesn't go as planned, because I feel like it's gonna be okay. Like I can figure out a way. And one of the earliest guests on this podcast also told me, she's like, you gotta believe in yourself after so many years of working and training. you should be able to figure it out. But for a lot of people who are in a very more like a traditional setting, maybe they're like just struggling. They
Hmm.
don't really have the support from the people around them to show them these kind of stories to me.
Sure.
It's part of the reason why I have this podcast. When you are going through your transition, how do you face the resistance from people who are around you? Because from a Jewish family, I understand it's also like banker, doctor, lawyer.
Totally. Yeah, there's like three acceptable professions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny actually because both my parents are entrepreneurs, so it's funny that they were so opposed. But I think, I don't know, every generation wants something different for their kids. But how did I face that? I mean, I think it just took a lot of personal struggle for me to get to the point of really feeling resolute within myself, such that even when people that I really cared about their opinion didn't agree with what I was doing or thought it was stupid, that I could withstand it. And honestly, it was really hard. It's hard when your family whose opinion you really like, you want their approval, particularly for me, like my parents. It's hard when they're worried for you, when they don't think you're doing the right thing. I mean, I really struggled with that, but I think, like I said, I just had to go on my own journey of um, just really sticking with this idea within myself that I knew I was doing the right thing for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's no magic secret to like believing in yourself and having that confidence. I wish there was.
Just need to do it and don't wait for the permission, I guess. And what
Hmm.
how you built Homeroom is like super exciting. I feel like I'm watching a movie because you went to this underground food market
Yeah.
and it's a huge success. That's the first trial, right?
Yeah, it
And
was the first place we ever served our food. And it was just really like very successful from the beginning, which is amazing.
would you say that it's also coincide with the explosion of social media at the same time? Because people are just using Instagram and post it and you went viral.
Totally. I mean, I think every successful business, it's like an alchemy, like it has to the baseline, it has to be a good idea and a great product, but that's like, necessary, but not sufficient for success kind of a thing. Um, yeah, I think a lot of factors came together. I think we were really early to really engage our audience. Honestly, that's what early social media really was. Right now, you have to pay to, reach your audience. At the time, like all these sites, like were just growing. This was 2010. I mean, I feel like so ancient things, but like every Facebook post like reached everyone that followed us, and like it was actually a way you could engage and not spend money. And we like did a blog where we would track our progress and post pictures, and we raised money on Kickstarter to get people engaged. We're actually the first restaurant to raise money successfully on Kickstarter. But to show you how early days this was, I mean, we wanted to raise $7,000 and we raised 9,000. Like today, people raise like millions. Like it was a very young company at the time, and that idea of asking strangers for money in exchange for like a t-shirt or a special event or whatever, it just seemed wild. But now it's more normal.
Yeah. I read that. I was like, huh, that's another route I can generate some kind of revenue if I ever
Yeah.
go to Starbucks. That's 2010. How long does it take from that food market to when you actually negotiate a deal? You got into that corner store. How long does it take before that until you have a functional business like day to day?
Yeah, I mean, it was like 15 months from the moment that I was fired to the moment that Homeroom opened. And in that time, we started looking for places, and honestly, multiple leases fell through. We almost, gave up because it was just honestly really hard to find a space. Another thing to sort of the luck that it takes, honestly, thank God the spaces that we didn't get fell through, because the location we have is amazing. And we didn't think so at the time. It was just like what we could afford. And no one would have said this is a good location. But, people now are like, oh my God, you were brilliant to like move into that neighborhood so early. It was pretty desolate from a business standpoint at the time. Like there was just not other businesses that were operating there, but it was what we could afford. Yeah, it took a lot of grit of doing like a lot of like mobile events to try to raise awareness, to build an audience such that when we'd open our doors, there would be people who knew what the heck we were doing and liked our food. And but that was really successful. Our events that we were doing were very busy from the get, and then the restaurant was very busy from the moment it opened.
Yeah, it's like a hit. It's a viral success restaurant story almost. It sounds
Totally. And it's funny because actually, like, I have, at this point, so many friends in the industry, and I feel like, and I'll consult and stuff like that. And I'm great at certain things. Like, I'm the best person you could ever ask for as like an advisor or a mentor. But the one area where I have real weakness is like, what do you do if you just like didn't build an audience, if you like can't get people in the door? And I'm like, like I did all these things right. I could say like do these things like this, but I'm always like, well, shoot, that sounds like a really scary problem. I don't, I don't totally know how to help you.
never had that problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's 15 months. That's a really, really fast, I would say, for a business to take off, actually, I think.
Yeah. It felt like a forever at the time because I'm really impatient and, and I was not working and not making money. So it felt stressful to me as I'm like watching my bank account just dip every month, trying to pay for myself to live, never knowing when I'm going to get a paycheck again. It was very like financially stressful, but it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. I think some of your earlier experience when you were trying to, because when I read your book, I was just in one of the Ivy League university or undergrad, is it?
Yeah, I went to Princeton.
Yeah, Princeton. And then you were just like doing internship in a restaurant. Because
Yeah.
my channel at the beginning, I have like a lot of restaurant review videos. I actually know the chefs and I know some people who work in Michelin star restaurants. It's never fancy, right? My friends will be like, yeah, you think that's fun? It's just mushroom, like cut them all the
Totally. Yeah.
So I think maybe because you have had that experience, you know that the when you're living sort of like paycheck to paycheck, the kind of stress. So you're also more prepared than the people who have never done that before.
Oh, totally. I mean, I also think there's a piece, like, as people are thinking about moving into something they think they might love, like I did spend, years first working for free in restaurants just to learn, and then working and then paid also to continue my education and figure it out. But I mean, I think if you think, oh gosh, there's something I'd really go after, I think that all of that exposure was so helpful. Like, I can't imagine having opened my restaurant just being like, oh, I think I'd love restaurants. I wouldn't have known all the pieces that are really hard or how to structure it, like I exposed myself. So I think sometimes we like, idealize certain professions or certain things. I think if people can find a way to give themselves some kind of exposure, I mean, I realize it's a privilege, but for me, the best exposure is always just to go ask to work for free, because that way you don't have to pay for your education. You can just, and you can make it work for you because no one's going to be like, you must be here at 9 a.m. It's like you can, usually like sort of ask for what you need in terms of how that's structured. Yeah, I think that it's helpful just to get some exposure because, again, sometimes the reality versus what your, vision is radically different. And it's helpful to know like, oh, this isn't for me, or oh, this is, but, maybe a variation of it.
Yeah, because you also said that like all of our experiences, even the ones that we regret as an abject waste of time, are forming little interconnection nodes beneath the ground.
Totally. Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, that chapter I write about this tattoo I have. It's actually like on my arm right here. It's a asparagus, but not the spear. It's like the plant. And it's talking about how they grow and as a sort of a metaphor for life. And yeah, I do think like all the more exposure you can get, those are just, you never know how they're going to come together. But I think particularly if you're going to follow a non-traditional path, getting exposure, putting yourself out there, like even when you're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be, I guarantee it will like mold where you find yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Homeroom has become a huge success. I think you mentioned that part of the secret sauce of building a great organization is a dedication to connect at all levels. And it reminded me like how meaningful relationships in any entrepreneurial journey. When you step back from the daily operations now, right? Like how has your perspective on leadership evolved?
So part of, my journey was not just creating this job that I would love, but it was really trying to figure out, oh, I haven't actually liked any job I've ever had. How do I make a place where other people want to work as well? So, that's definitely sort of the journey in the book, is like, how do you make a place that's great to work? What does it even mean for something to be great or meaningful or connected? What are systems and structures you could implement that actually make that happen? What are all the ways that I screwed this up, so you don't think that this is like a perfect how-to book? Like all of this was learned through mistakes. I'd say that my sort of leadership philosophy at this point is that your job is always to create the structures within other people are free to be themselves and express themselves. So it's just to sort of set the ground rules or whatever. It's like an example is we wanted to have service standards, right? Like when you go to a restaurant, how you're treated, how you handle mistakes, that all matters. That's stuff you can train people on. And a lot of restaurants will give people like no autonomy. They give you like a script that you just repeat at every at every table. Like, if you've ever been to McDonald's, they're like, do you want fries with that? Like they're not, randomly like curious, they are required to say that, right? That's one model. And another model is like, we've all been to just like mom and pop restaurants where like, depending on who's serving you, is like terrible service or maybe it's great, So we ended up coming up with something. It was actually based on just a really great server I had, where I was like, what is your secret? And he was like, oh, I challenged myself to stoke out 5 tables a day. And that just meant he was going to go above and beyond to do whatever it took to be the best part of those people's day. He was so creative. And so we started to implement that as our service standard. We're like, hey, our mission is to be the best part of people's day. We want you to try to do that for everyone, but for 5 tables a day, you have to, and you can do whatever you want within that. But if that person, like, think about what it would take to be the best part of their day and use your creativity. So, it creates a standard for everyone to follow. So your business stands for something, but it gives people tremendous freedom and creativity within the boundary. So I think that's really like the model of leadership I follow.
That's also what you frame it in the book as a coloring book rather than blank piece of paper, so that people have some kind of roadmap to follow, but they can
totally.
When I read the book, I really love it. It's not just some kind of how-to books. You have this humor in you, and then you have great storytelling. You put the scene first, and then you tell the story, and you sort of give some kind of learning. I feel like that's the best. And when you wrote about Homeroom, it reminded me, although I've never visited, I've only been to like California maybe several times. So when I read about Homeroom, it reminded me some of the favorite restaurants that I have been to. Because I've been to some really fancy restaurants, some like really, now I'm in Lisbon, there's a lot of mom and pop shop. No matter how much the stuff costs or how fancy it is, the best kind of restaurant to me is the restaurant that can make you feel like home. So the Homeroom, just by the name and also by you describing it, I feel like it's somewhere that people will make them feel like home, and which is possibly why it can stand out because mac and cheese to me is not something that's very like high entry barrier, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I imagine this must be like, if people really want to compete, that it's not that difficult. But if you also actually have solidified this, it's definitely by the culture and philosophy. One of the things that you mentioned in the book, that's actually the first time when I come across your Homeroom and the whole book, is from Bloomberg Business Week. And you talk about the harassment-free workplace model. If you can tell our audience a little bit more, because I'm really intrigued by that story, inspired by the impact you created.
Yeah, thank you. Well, for one, thanks for sort of the comment about how like funny and approachable the book is. That was really the goal. I've always found like the genre of business books and like leadership books is very dry in general. And I find that like even the best ones often don't have tremendous value, like beyond like the introduction lays out the whole concept and you're like, got it, and then it's like 200 pages of like some dry examples. Yeah. So I wanted it to be like a genuinely human story, because that's what it is, right? And that's what's happening behind the scenes. And I wanted it to appeal to actual people who are just, whether you operate a company at a high level or you're just thinking about leaving your job, I wanted it to appeal. So, it's intended to be a fun read. And I think it has been pretty successful in that regard. Anyway, to answer your question about our harassment system, I do detail in the book all these different techniques that we developed sort of over time to support a sense of a deep like collaboration and autonomy and connection and meaning through the workplace. And then it sort of culminates in this experience that actually started out pretty bad. Like our staff was complaining that they were experiencing harassment by customers. But because we had this really fabulous, and engaged culture, we got everyone involved in creating a solution to it. And we did go through some trial and error. It was not perfect from the start, but it actually ended up being extremely transformative and moved us from having where almost every, at least woman on staff, unfortunately had a story of being harassed at some point by a customer to where it was almost never a problem. And I sat on the system for years and it's just something we used internally. And then I think when Me Too happened, I was like, oh gosh, more of the world should really know about this. And so I wrote about it in the Washington Post, and that article went super viral. And then I was invited to testify in front of the United States Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, who sort of oversees how harassment or anti-harassment is like enforced in America. Yeah. And they, made it one of their recommended standards. So it just since then has really taken off. And now it's a system used by, bars and restaurants truly around the world. It's taught all over the place. And I think it's just an example of like how much power there is in just, and this is just from one little restaurant, right? If you're doing something you love, if you engage other people in doing stuff they love, if you really like do the right things, you can create things that genuinely like change the world, that have an impact like far beyond, your little neck of the universe. And I think that's something I wanted people to know and to think about, because I think if more people felt empowered, there's sort of no telling what we can do.
That's how I felt after I read your book, because you sort of like encourage, you have these 3 wishes to push people to chase their dream, to like be empowered even as a woman. I think that system and the email that you had received back in the days before you developed that wouldn't have happened if you haven't created that culture for people to be able to feel safe to speak up.
Totally.
Because you mentioned in the book that actually this has been happened for ages in the restaurant industry. And these people, they just never felt that other people would care.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that you're this female leadership style? Because the other thing I found it very funny is when you mentioned in the book, you said that I wanted to understand why there is more potato in Pringle than women at the helm of the Fortune 500.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you talk about those business books, I sort of agree, because I read a lot of like business books about successful young entrepreneurs. They're all the same stereotype. There's all like hustle culture, bros drop out of Stanford and that kind of and there is no different kind of role models. How do you think that you kind of make the balance? Because sometimes the leadership, people always say that a woman leader is different from men, right? Because they expect different things from women. How do you embody that, your philosophy into that leadership?
Yeah, I think some of the journey is like my like reluctant journey into feminism, honestly, because I think when I started Homeroom, honestly, a lawyer, I've been really lucky. I'd had a lot of really powerful female bosses. I had worked at a firm that was 50-50 men and women. Like it was not that they were partners. Like I just hadn't felt like there was something super different or some kind of barrier to my success, honestly, because of my gender. And then the further I made it in the world of business, the more I was like, where on earth are all the women? I was just like shocked, And more than that, I think I just started realizing like, oh, the correlation between all these workplaces I didn't like and, is that they're based on these very traditionally masculine norms and masculine culture. And I started to really be able to name and identify like, oh, what am I actually bringing to the table that is feminine here or that is different? And I realized it was actually like a huge source of competitive advantage, because it's not common, right? And so that was also part of why I wrote the book. And I think anyone can embrace that sort of, quote, feminine values, I think can appeal to people of all genders. But I just think it's not, because there's so few women in top leadership positions in large companies, it's not the norm, So the way I describe it is I usually use like this sports metaphor, honestly, where I'm a big surfer, and the traditional rules of surfing, which I would define as very masculine, is very competitive and winner take all. So it's like the first person who gets on the wave just gets the wave all to themselves. So everyone is like, jostling, trying to make it on, trying to get as many waves as they can. But that's just the sport. That's the rules. But this one day I went to a beach and it happened to be all women in the water, which is very uncommon. And no one even knew each other. But all of a sudden we just started playing by totally different rules. And everyone started sharing waves and communicating and taking turns. And, I think that sort of communication, collaboration, focus on the collective success of the group versus the success of the individual is like really the female like leadership competitive advantage. And like I said, it's not exclusive to women. I think there's plenty of men who, also choose to, but I think it's more often than not, I find it in women. And at least in myself, I recognize that this is actually the competitive advantage that I bring to business.
Yeah, the collective collaboration from women, like we're more prone to that. Even you look at some successful men who are in a leadership position, they will be able to do that as well. So yeah, if you look back to the whole 10 years when you built Homeroom, do you still remember what was some of the funniest and surprising moment during that time? Do you still remember anything that make you laugh out loud? You share one moment with us.
Oh, I mean, there's so many things that make me laugh out loud. Being a leader, I think I'm always surprised by how quirky and ridiculous human beings can be. I definitely write about it in the book of some of like the ways that people could just be totally deviant, but I think that always really surprised me. But I don't know. I mean, this is a weird one, but I think, frankly, so when we opened in the bathroom, we would keep these nerdy, like school age pictures of people in the bathroom. So if you were a customer, you could bring like, here's an awkward photo of me from high school. Like, here's my elementary school picture where I like have my eyes closed, whatever it is. And we would just put them up in the bathroom. It was our number one most stolen item. Like random customers would go into the bathroom and pocket people's like awkward high school photos. So I'd say that is like a random funny moment where it's just like human nature is so bizarre. Like I never would have anticipated that in a million years, but that was,
I would have never anticipated that. What was so
yeah. People always keep you on your toes. I guess that's what I'd say. That is like consistently the funniest thing of operating a business that really interfaces with the public.
Yeah. You observe things differently.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's next, right? Because now you have sold Homeroom. You're still on the board. And now you wrote this book. It's finished. So it's like. I haven't checked. Hopefully it's gonna be on the bestseller list if you haven't.
You and me both, yeah.
Yeah. And then what does next looks for you? Are you exploring any new entrepreneurial projects or anything in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think for right now, I'm really excited to expand the impact of the book. So doing things like this, teaching, I am doing a lot more like teaching, workshops, consulting, stuff like that to try to like make these ideas come alive for people. But honestly, I think I'll return to, either starting or running a company at some point, just because I really find a lot of joy in that. And it was just the right time for my sort of, journey at Homeroom for that chapter to close and for a different chapter to open. But yeah, I think that is my biggest takeaway is I really love, as much as I love writing, I love teaching, but I really love like leading. I love having that experience. And so I think I'll probably go back to
this. This is interesting. What kind of new business you wanted to run? Like in what?
It's sort of funny. I think with Homeroom, I had this idea just like burning a hole in my pocket for a long time. So it was really clear. I think at this stage in my career, I don't feel that way. There's not like a company I feel like I must do, so I think that's sort of what I'm, on the journey to figure out like what would that next thing be. And in the meantime, I'm helping other people with theirs, which is very meaningful to me. So that's, I feel like I'm fortunate that I get to do great work where I broaden the impact of the book by working with other companies. But yes, I think when I get struck by that idea that's burning a hole in my pocket, that's the next thing I'll be doing.
Great. Just for people who maybe want your help, what kind of companies that you help, or is there a
Oh
specific?
gosh, I mean, all kinds, all industries. I think the ideas from the book are relevant to anyone who cares about either creating a meaningful career or a meaningful workplace, and really wants to figure out how can I do this differently? How can I engage people differently? Or frankly, even I find like companies approach me that just want to have even just better financial results. And part of that is getting the people who work for them to be engaged, to care, and to like want to be involved in making it better. So I think, yeah, I mean, anything from, like education companies to software companies to, consumer packaged goods. Like, I am lucky to work with lots of different folks.
Yeah, yeah. Especially being in California, I guess there's so many innovation happening and new
Mhm.
companies and people who need advice from people who have successfully built um, successful companies before. You
Totally. Yeah.
mentioned financial advice. There's one chapter in the book you talk about, is it open book finance?
Open book management. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then you adopt it and elevated it, adapt to Homeroom. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. So I was trying to figure out how, again, like how do we increase engagement? How do we get people to care? How do we get this company to mean something to them as much as it meant to me? I really did spend a lot of time researching a bunch of stuff that didn't work. But then I stumbled upon this thing called open book management, which is basically the concept of it is just that business is a sport. At least one of the goals of this particular sport is, to earn money, but we don't share our scorecard with the team. Usually, it's pretty rare. Like most companies don't share all their financials with everyone who works there. But I'd say even more so than sharing it's getting people to engage and participate. So teaching financial literacy and then requiring that people at all different levels of the organization, not just the executive team, are actually engaging with various metrics that show the financial health of the organization. And so we implemented it. So we'd have a meeting every single week where leaders were required to attend, but all staff were paid to attend, anyone who wanted to learn to participate. And we would teach about it in a new hire orientation as well. So they'd get a background of like, this is what our financials look like. This is how you can participate. These are the opportunities available. And it's really cool. So you'd sit at a meeting and you'd go around a huge table and people would write the numbers up there. Like, maybe they're watching, traditional things like sales or labor numbers, but also non-traditional things like, our staff happiness would get measured every single week. You start to get this snapshot of how the business is and everyone is participating and everyone's telling stories about, how to do this and how to solve problems. And that's really fun. Everyone's all of a sudden part of the business versus just passively listening as a leader shares something, or even worse, like no one's sharing anything with them and then expecting them to do a good job.
Yeah, rather than the financial like profitability, I remember you also incorporate something else, right? It's like, is it customer impact, that kind of a...
Oh yeah, we would measure like our customer happiness on various metrics every single week. Same for staff, which is uncommon. Most companies will do like maybe a 360 like once a year, but every single week we were getting data from our staff. So you can start to see trends. You can start to see when morale is like going down or, something's happening.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think people should definitely go and get your book, because I finished it in like 3 days.
Oh, thank you.
I really love the book. For aspiring entrepreneurs, what's one piece of advice from the Mac and Cheese Millionaire that you wish everyone knew?
Gosh. I mean, I think that it's just always worth taking that chance because it's easy to say here on the side of being successful, like, oh, yeah, I'm so glad I took a risk. But honestly, even if it had really tanked, I think I would be so grateful I had tried.
Yeah.
I think I would have led a much more fulfilled life knowing that I had tried genuinely to do something that mattered to me versus being too afraid to ever try. So I'd say just go for it. That's my advice.
Yeah, just go for it. I have heard this from multiple people. Like the one thing is startups fail, but founders don't. And the other mantra that's constantly at the back of my mind is like, I would rather try and fail, but not fail to try. So
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
maybe some listeners can pick it up. So let's go for a lightning round. Are you ready?
Yeah.
If you could serve mac and cheese to any historical figure, who would that be and why?
Whew. Well, I guess supposedly the origin of the food is like Thomas Jefferson. So I think I'd be curious to serve my version and then to see what version he had been served, because I'm so curious what that dish looked like at the time.
Great. What's your favorite guilty pleasure food besides mac and cheese?
Honestly, like just cheese, just like fancy cheese. So it's a little bit of a cheater, but that's the truth. Yeah.
The fancy cheese like they serve in those Michelin star restaurants. Like
Oh
they,
my
they
God.
put
Yeah.
all
I can eat like really disgusting amounts of just like really high end cheese for sure. Yeah.
um, what's the funniest feedback you've ever received from a customer?
Oh my God. So we would allow people to customize their dishes. So someone would create something that's like just quite disgusting. Like they'd add like a lot of tuna, but then also like want, Caesar dressing on it, and like adding a lot of like fish into a cheese dish. Like it's common sense would tell you like this is not going to be tasty. So they would be like, I don't like my mac and cheese. And it was always just hard to be like, well, you did pick like the world's most bizarre combination. And of course, we just would replace it for them and thank them for the feedback. But I think that always made me laugh. Like it feels like such a thing that people do to themselves. They like create their own misery and then like complain about it, kind of a thing.
That's why we need great chefs, because like everyday people, they might not know what's the best combination.
It's true. Yeah.
What is one skills that you're working on or learning right now other than surfing?
Oh, other than surfing, I'd say that's like the one I'm always working on. Um, I'm working on like taking a step back more often and trying to think about all the ways that something that's hard actually has like nothing to do with me, like taking a different perspective. Because I think whether it's like a family or a work thing or a conflict, I think so often like when something happens that rubs us the wrong way, like we take it personally because we have such sort of a self-centered worldview. And I've been trying to practice, what are the
Mindfulness.
other things that this could mean versus just always looking at myself first.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. What was the last book you read that inspired you?
I really liked In the Shadow of the Mountain. It was a great book. Yeah, In the Shadow of the Mountain by Sylvia Vasquez Lovato. That's who it is.
Shadow of the Mountain.
Yeah, it's just a great memoir about her life, like climbing Everest, and sort of what that meant personally, professionally. I thought it was a great story.
Great. I have a closing tradition is that you receive a question from the previous guest. So his question is, what sound would you change in your life today?
Ooh, I would probably have there be less of it. I'd probably choose to have more silence than I do.
More silence. So the background is because he's a communication and sound expert. That's why he asked this
Oh,
question.
cool.
Yeah. And can you leave a question for the next guest?
Yeah, what's something that you are excited about but afraid of that you haven't told anyone about yet?
Wow. So many interesting terms. What's something that you're excited about that you're afraid of that you haven't told anyone yet? Like,
Yeah.
can I ask one final question? I know that you have 2 daughters, right?
Yeah, I have two biological kids. I'm part of a blended family and then two stepdaughters. So yeah, I have actually 3 daughters and a son, if you put it all
Okay. So
together. Yeah.
interesting. So what do you want your 3 daughters to say about you when they grow up, and what would your one son say all the women in your family?
Aw. I mean, I think I want them all to say the same thing, which was that I was a great role model for how to live. Because I think that's like my number one hope as a parent is to try to do things that are setting the example for them. So if I achieve that, I'd feel quite successful.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that I should have asked but I missed?
Oh, this was great. Thank you so much. It was really fun to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your journey. And for our listeners who wanted to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Sure. Just my website is easiest. It's erinwade.co.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for your time. So that's another episode of Escape 9 to 5. Escape 9 to 5 is my way to help people visualize and see the stories behind those who have changed their life from a traditional 9 to 5 job to a different portfolio life. If you like this video, you might resonate with this video as well. All the links will be in the show notes, and you feel free to check out. If you listen to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and if you like it, don't forget to give us a 5-star review. It really helps the podcast to be discovered by other people. And if you like any specific clips or mantras or any takeaway from this video, please share with us in the comments down below. Share with your friends and family. That really helps the podcast. Thanks for being on this amazing journey. Until next time, I hope this episode gives you a little bit of inspiration, nudge you a little bit to do something on your own or just try something out for the first time ever. We're here with you. We have this whole community and all the guests coming. I'll see you next time.